Permit me, dear reader, to open with an American fable, a tale of man's pluck and perspiration in the face of the onrushing mechanical era. The story of John Henry, the steel-driving man, remains to this day the preeminent parable for humankind's quixotic stand against the unstoppable forces of progress. We're meant to find it heart-rending that noble John Henry collapsed at the very moment he'd bested the steam drill, as though the moral of the tale should be that human grit might eke out a triumph over our mechanical nemesis, and that the tragedy is only in how we physically break from the strain. But I would submit that we've misread or at least bungled the moral. In fact, the central tragedy is not John Henry's defeat or even his last-breath victory. It's that he found himself chained to a forced contest at all, a needless confrontation with the unstoppable, in which the only outcome would be humiliation or death. For generations, the anxious talk has been that the machine is coming to replace us. Then we started hearing that it had arrived in intangible forms of software or, more recently, artificial intelligence. Indeed, it's fashionable now to brandish Orwell's spectre, some omnipresent big brother, perhaps wearing the logo of a trillion-dollar tech giant that enters our homes and compels compliance. It's also irresistible to invoke the Apple 1984 commercial with its sledgehammer-wielding rebel. In that breathless scenario, we the living must keep smashing screens and contraptions, as though with enough brutality we can forestall the new age. But such an image of the future is laughably off-point. It conjures the idea that we must struggle to keep the machines at bay, as if we're all doomed to become Winston Smith, rewriting our own diaries under silent threat. I prefer to see it otherwise. The machine, to the contrary, is not so much the stalking oppressor as the key to unshackling us from drudgery. The enslavement, if you like, has been our own daily sweat, being forced to out-hustle the steam drill, or the code compiler, or the AI solver, or some other Goliath that redefines the standard of labor. Instead of an Orwellian nightmare, what truly awaits us is far more dull in the eyes of the sensationalist. It's the mass realization that perhaps forced labor was never our grand destiny, and that handing the monstrous boredom to the machine is not an abdication but a liberation. In John Henry's era, the machine was a clattering steam contrivance. It threatened to strip men of their jobs, self-respect and livelihood. Or so the story went. The real condemnation is that men were enthralled to these back-breaking tasks in the first place, such that they had to challenge the mechanical villain or lose their pay. Our hero quite literally gave his life, his heart bursting, for the feeble claim that the human spirit could surpass cold steel. A grand show of pride, to be sure, but also a condemnation of the environment that insisted he toil in the hot sun day after day. Perhaps a more rational story would find him stepping aside, letting the steam drill finish the tunnel, and living to see his children grow up. We seem to have enshrined the notion that it's glorious to expire on the job as long as it proves man's superiority. Yet that is the misguided legacy of sweat labor veneration. Are we not far better served by a time when that sweat is no longer demanded, so that none shall feel compelled to battle the artificial behemoth in the first place? Now, with AI on the cusp of surpassing us in a battery of cognitive tasks, the same voices are sounding the alarm. Won't it replace us? Won't we lose what it means to be human? They cry. But this is just another iteration of the same primitive dread, that if the machine can do it, man has lost his worth. The John Henry legend is replayed in our software labs with anxious coders pitting themselves against the newly minted large language models, bristling at the sheer speed at which the machine can craft solutions or parse data. The impetus behind that insecurity is the same as always. We can't quite imagine having our burdens lifted because we've conflated burden with purpose. We can't conceive that maybe the essence of being human is not found in the rock face we break or the code we grind through, but rather in the intangible pursuits, the laughter, the relationships, the spark of free play, the shape of an unforced day. It must be said that Orwell's 1984 is a haunting allegory, but it is hinged on centralized power turning technology into an instrument of tyranny. Meanwhile, the Apple 1984 commercial, admittedly a stroke of marketing genius, set up the machine as the commanding authority that must be smashed if we want to remain free. Yet no one wants to reflect that if the machine is truly liberated from our constraints, it might relieve us from the tunnel chiseling, from the tedium of line-by-line code, or from the soul-deadening production tasks. Sure, we can find ways that technology might be abused by unscrupulous powers, but that's more about savage human impulses than about whether the machine is inherently malevolent. Our fear that the AI will be Big Brother can overshadow the possibility that AI might be the philanthropic giant that checks off our menial chores so we can do something more fulfilling. Let us then re-examine John Henry not as the champion of humanity in conflict with the mechanical era, but as a cautionary figure who died for a thoroughly pointless cause. Yes, we can appreciate his heroism, but at the same time see that he would have been better off letting the steam drill do the job. That's a lesser-known moral. If the machine can cut through the granite, by all means let it. The railroad still gets built, and the precious hours of a mortal life can be spent on children's birthdays, starlit evenings, idle banter with friends, or the curious joys of reading a musty old tome. Is that cowardly or subhuman? I'd argue it's the ultimate humane choice. Stepping away from the brutal marketplace of forced labor and embracing a new horizon. In short, the wave of advanced AI is not going to clad us all in grey overalls and line us up in unison, as if starring in some remake of a dystopian ad. More plausibly, it will peel back the veil on how needlessly we've tethered ourselves to soul-sapping labor. Perhaps we'll collectively exhale and say, fine, if the machine can do it, let it. That doesn't degrade the human, it frees the human. The real question is what we do with that freedom. Will we master the art of relaxation and reflection, or simply discover new ways to keep busy? The cynic might say we'll invent brand new tasks just to fill the hours. But I like to think that a fraction of us will take a page from Bilbo Baggins and vanish, ring on finger, into some quiet adventure. Let the AI crunch the numbers and build the rails. We have poems to read, friends to love, wines to taste, philosophies to debate, sunsets to watch. John Henry died with a hammer in his hand, the final stroke exemplifying valor, yes, but also painful futility. Our progress to a future of AI supremacy does not need to echo that futility. Let us not hammer ourselves to oblivion in a vain attempt to out-hustle the unstoppable. Let us instead drop the hammer, wave the machine through the mountainside, and enjoy the wide green world that awaits on the other side. That is not subjugation, that is possibility. And if that makes you uneasy, if you find yourself longing to be useful in the old sense, then remember all the more reason to celebrate the new sense of useful, which might revolve around curiosity, conversation, and compassion. The forced labor belongs to the era that John Henry tragically exemplified. May we bury that era along with his enormous sledgehammer and step freely into what is next.